Have you ever felt the heat of another person's eyes on you as they laugh? Not because something is funny, but because something inside you is being measured, diminished, quietly placed beneath them. And in that moment, did you sense that what they were really doing was testing whether you would accept a lower position in the invisible hierarchy that governs all human life? Listen closely, because this is where power either dies in you or is born in silence. Shaming is not an accident of social interaction. It is not harmless humor. It is not ignorance. Shaming is a weapon, one of the oldest, most efficient, and most psychologically surgical tools ever invented by human beings to establish dominance without lifting a blade. When someone shames you, publicly or privately, subtly or brutally, they are not speaking to your ears. They are speaking to your nervous system. They are asking a single question in a language older than words. Will you collapse, or will you remain intact? The moment you tolerate shame, the moment you smile it away, rationalize it, absorb it, or explain yourself to escape its sting, you silently sign a contract that places you beneath the one who delivered it. And once that contract is signed, the balance of power shifts permanently unless it is violently renegotiated in the psychological realm. Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology gave it clinical names. He observed courts, rulers, generals, and crowds not as moral stories, but as living laboratories of power. He saw that humiliation was not merely an insult but a strategic act, a public carving of status. To shame someone is to redraw the map of who may speak, who may command attention, who may define reality. Shame compresses a human being inward. It makes the body smaller, the voice quieter, the gaze evasive. It trains the mind to seek approval rather than exert will. And the one who delivers shame, if unchallenged, grows larger, louder, more entitled. This is not philosophy. This is anatomy of dominance. Picture the ancient city, stone corridors echoing with whispers where reputations were currency, and ridicule could destroy a family faster than a sword. Machiavelli watched men fall not because they were weak, but because they allowed themselves to be symbolically stripped in front of others. Once stripped, they were no longer feared. Once no longer feared, they were no longer safe. Shame is social blood in the water. Where it appears, predators gather, and the most dangerous predators are not loud. They are smiling. They call it a joke. They call it honesty. They call it concern. But beneath every act of shaming lies a calculation. If I can make you feel small, I can make myself large without resistance. The modern world pretends to be civilized, but it has only refined its cruelty. Shame no longer always comes in the form of open ridicule in the square. It arrives as passive-aggressive remarks, as laughter slightly too long, as questions designed to expose weakness, as public corrections, as helpful reminders of your past failures, as comparisons that place you subtly behind. It arrives online, multiplied by distance and anonymity, but its psychological effect is ancient and precise. It bypasses logic and strikes the primal fear of social exile. And most people, trained to seek belonging above power, surrender instantly. They apologize for existing. They explain themselves. They shrink. They tolerate. This tolerance is the great lie sold to the weak and the naive. Tolerance of shaming is framed as maturity, humility, kindness. But Machiavelli would laugh at such language because he knew that power does not care about your moral vocabulary. Power only recognizes behavior. When you tolerate shaming, you teach the world how to treat you. You demonstrate that your boundaries are soft, that your self-image can be negotiated by external voices, that your internal throne is empty enough for others to sit upon. Once this is observed, it is remembered. People do not forget who allows themselves to be diminished. They may act polite, they may even be friendly, but in their internal calculus, you have been classified. The dangerous truth is that most shaming does not come from enemies. It comes from peers, friends, colleagues, family. Those closest to you are the most capable of shaming you effectively because they understand the terrain of your insecurities. They know where your identity is still under construction. They know which words will echo longest when the room goes silent. Machiavelli understood that proximity amplifies power. The closer the source of shame, the deeper its potential cut. This is why courts were filled with smiling faces and sharpened tongues. This is why betrayal often wears familiarity. And this is why your first battlefield is not against strangers, but against those who feel comfortable enough to test you. Shame is not merely about making you feel bad. It is about rewriting your internal narrative. When someone shames you and you accept it, a subtle internal shift occurs. You begin to see yourself through their eyes. You replay the moment. You wonder if they were right. You adjust your behavior to avoid future exposure. This is how domination becomes self-sustaining. The oppressor no longer needs to act. The oppressed polices themselves. Machiavelli recognized this as the highest form of control. When fear and shame are internalized, power becomes effortless. But here is the forbidden insight, the one rarely spoken, because it disrupts social comfort. Shame only works on those who accept it. It requires participation. It requires belief. The moment you do not absorb it, the weapon misfires. The moment you refuse to emotionally validate the attempt to diminish you, the power reverses direction. The shamer is exposed as someone seeking elevation through reduction, which is the behavior of the insecure, not the dominant. But this reversal does not happen through explanations or defenses. Those are traps. Defending yourself against shame signals that the charge was legitimate enough to require rebuttal. Explaining yourself hands the other person the authority to judge your explanation. Apologizing seals your inferiority. Machiavelli would tell you that power is not reclaimed through words, but through posture, timing, and emotional refusal. Silence, when wielded correctly, is not weakness. It is ambiguity, and ambiguity terrifies those who seek dominance through clarity of hierarchy. A calm, unreactive presence in the face of attempted shaming creates a vacuum. The shamer expects contraction. When it does not occur, their move hangs in the air, unanswered, awkward, exposed. Others notice. Hierarchies tremble not when challenged loudly, but when their signals fail to produce the expected response. Consider the psychology of the one who shames. They are not strong. They are hunger. They seek confirmation of their position. They need you to collapse so they can feel upright. When you do not give them that satisfaction, you deny them nourishment. Power is relational. It exists only in contrast. Remove the contrast, and their dominance dissolves into noise. This is why the dark path is not about attacking the shamer, but about rendering them irrelevant. Machiavelli believed that the most efficient victory is the one that leaves your opponent confused about whether a battle even occurred. There is a coldness required for this path, and it is not cruelty but clarity. You must see shaming for what it is without personalizing it. The moment you personalize it, you are inside their frame. You are playing their game. The strategic mind steps outside and observes. It asks, what is being attempted here? What position are they trying to place me in? What reaction are they expecting? And then it denies them precisely that reaction. This denial is not passive. It is active restraint. It is the discipline of not flinching when the social blade swings toward your throat. This discipline is rare because it requires a stable internal hierarchy. You must know who you are without external applause. You must be anchored enough that another person's attempt to redefine you feels like static, not threat. Machiavelli knew that rulers who depended on love were fragile because love is conditional and volatile. Fear, he argued, was more reliable. But beneath that argument was a deeper insight. Self-respect must be non-negotiable. The moment your sense of self can be publicly adjusted by others, you are already ruled. The world will test this repeatedly. It will dress shaming in humor, in concern, in social norms. It will tell you not to be sensitive, not to be dramatic, not to take things personally. These phrases are not advice. They are instructions to accept you. Diminishment quietly. They are the language of those who benefit from your silence. Machiavelli would advise you to listen not to the words but to the outcome. Who gains status? Who loses it? Who speaks more freely afterward? Who becomes cautious? Power leaves footprints. Follow them. To never tolerate shaming does not mean to erupt, to accuse, to moralize. That is the mistake of the impulsive. Emotional outbursts confirm vulnerability. They make you look governed by others. The dark way is colder, slower, more surgical. It is the refusal to internalize. It is the unyielding maintenance of composure. It is the ability to look at someone who attempts to shrink you and see clearly that they have revealed more about themselves than about you. In that moment, the balance begins to shift, not visibly, but decisively. This is where the cinematic tension lives, in the quiet moments where nothing seems to happen, but everything changes. A room feels different. A conversation pauses a beat too long. The person who attempted to shame senses resistance, not in words, but in atmosphere. Humans are exquisitely sensitive to hierarchy even when they deny it. They feel when their moves fail. They feel when their authority is not recognized. And they retreat, recalibrate, or escalate. Each choice reveals their position. Machiavelli would caution you that once you stop tolerating shaming, some relationships will fracture. This is not collateral damage, it is revelation. Those who relied on your tolerance to feel powerful will experience your refusal as betrayal. They will accuse you of changing, of becoming cold, of being arrogant. These accusations are confessions disguised as criticism. They mean you are no longer easy to place beneath them. Power resists loss. Expect resistance. Yet the reward is profound. When shaming no longer penetrates you, your presence changes. You mow differently. You speak when necessary, remain silent when advantageous. You do not rush to explain yourself. You do not chase validation. Others feel this before they understand it. Respect begins not as admiration, but as caution, and caution is the soil in which authority grows. This is not a call to cruelty, it is a call to sovereignty. Machiavelli did not advocate evil for its own sake. He advocated effectiveness in a world that punishes innocence. To never tolerate shaming is to refuse psychological colonization. It is to declare, without announcing it, that your inner domain is not open for public rearrangement. And once that declaration is consistently embodied, those who once sought to diminish you find themselves strangely powerless, unsure why their old tactics no longer work, unsettled by the silence where submission once lived. And so the question returns, heavier now, sharper, impossible to ignore. The next time someone attempts to make you smaller, to laugh at your expense, to expose you for sport, to correct you publicly, to remind you of your place, will you absorb it and shrink, or will you stand unmoved and let their power collapse under its own weight? You realize how rare it is to stand in the shadow of another and not flinch, to feel the invisible knife of judgment pressed against your ribs and breathe as though nothing touches you, as though you are made of stone, not flesh. Most people cannot. They are trained from childhood to seek approval, to bend under the weight of eyes that watch and whisper, to internalize every critique as though it were law, every smile as though it were a verdict. And in this compliance, in this quiet submission, they surrender without ever lifting a hand. Machiavelli understood this not as weakness, but as inevitability, until one dares to refuse it. To truly grasp the art of negating shaming, one must see it theater, as a meticulously staged play in which every participant has a role, and most refuse to see the script. The person shaming you has rehearsed this scene in their mind countless times. They know the lines that sting, the pauses that amplify insecurity, the angles of body language that signal exposure. They understand the anticipatory tension in the moment before words land, the moment when you sense judgment and consider whether to recoil. This is a battlefield where victory is silent, where the loudest moves are the ones unmade. The one who refuses to be shamed does not react because they have stepped off the stage entirely. They exist outside the expected narrative, and in doing so, they unmask the performer as insecure, desperate, small. Human beings are creatures of expectation. We rely on patterns, on consistency, on the knowledge that others will behave within defined emotional rules. Shame is effective precisely because it exploits these rules. We expect our peers to recoil, to apologize, to justify themselves, to try to re-establish balance. When these expectations are shattered, the social calculus collapses. You are no longer a player in the game they intended. You are a variable, unpredictable, potentially dangerous. Machiavelli's insight was that unpredictability in the mind of others is a form of power far greater than violence. Fear, respect, confusion, all can be triggered by the same act, the refusal to bend. Imagine a room where whispers have begun to circulate, where a careless joke about your weakness hangs in the air. The eyes that delivered it search for evidence that it landed. They want to see hesitation, discomfort, a flinch. And then you do nothing. You smile faintly, a neutral expression that neither invites further attack nor signals concession. In this act, you are both present and absent, calm and untouchable. The shamer experience is a peculiar discomfort. They are exposed because their strategy has failed. Others notice too, sensing the break in the expected order. Power does not scream. Power whispers in the stillness of unreactivity, and those who sought to assert dominance feel it slipping like sand through fingers. But the path to such mastery is steep and perilous. It demands constant self-scrutiny, the ability to monitor one's own emotional reactions with almost surgical precision. Every heartbeat, every fleeting thought, every twitch of tension in your muscles must be observed and controlled. One cannot simply decide to be unmoved. One must cultivate an inner landscape where reaction is optional, not reflexive. This requires understanding the mechanics of the mind, how fear amplifies perception, how anger distorts judgment, how insecurity invites domination. Machiavelli's dark philosophy thrives on these truths. He did not romanticize morality. He dissected human behavior, as a physician dissects a body, noting vulnerabilities, patterns, and opportunities for intervention. Consider the hierarchy of responses to shame. The weakest, most obvious, are immediate emotional reactions: flinching, stammering, defensiveness, aggression. These confirm the shamer's dominance and signal your participation in their game. Slightly stronger is rationalization, explaining, apologizing, justifying. These are subtler traps, psychological ambushes that suggest you acknowledge their authority over your self-conception. Only the rarest response, the cold, disciplined refusal, destabilizes the shamer entirely. It is a form of psychological counterattack that requires no words, no confrontation, no vindication. It is an act of sovereignty, yet sovereignty is lonely. When you begin to refuse shaming consistently, those who once relied on your compliance may react unpredictably. Some will attempt to provoke you further, to test the limits of your indifference. Others may distance themselves, seeking easier targets to assert power over. Some may craft narratives about you being arrogant, unfeeling, or dangerous. Machiavelli understood this as necessary collateral. When one removes oneself from the familiar hierarchy, the world must reorganize itself around the new reality. Resistance is not evidence of failure, it is evidence of impact. Power, in this context, is not a function of aggression, it is a function of consistency. To be untouchable in the face of shaming, one must behave as though external judgments are irrelevant, not because they are truly irrelevant, but because your internal hierarchy is immovable. You place your self-worth, your perception of identity, on a throne that is not accessible to others. Machiavelli's rulers, those who maintained command over volatile courts, understood this instinctively. A ruler who wavered in response to insults, critiques, or mockery invited plots, subversion, and eventual downfall. Stability of self is the foundation upon which all influence rests. There is also strategy in observation. A master of the dark way does not merely ignore shaming. They study it, catalogue it, and understand its patterns. They watch the shamer, noting timing, tone, choice of words, intended audience, and the subtle cues of anticipation. By understanding the machinery of the attack, one disarms it without confrontation. Knowledge transforms what seems like assault into data. Once the shamer is understood as predictable, their actions lose their terror. Fear is a currency. When it can no longer be spent on you, the shamer is impoverished. Consider the psychological geometry of group dynamics. Shame is rarely delivered in isolation. It is amplified by witnesses, by social pressure, by the human desire to conform. And yet, within this geometry, the refusal to be shamed is a singular act that radiates outward. Others see it. They internalize it. The social air shifts. One person's composure becomes a model of possibility. They begin to question their own participation in cycles of submission. Hierarchies ripple, not because one has loudly overpowered, but because one has silently refused to be controlled. Machiavelli understood that influence is often invisible until it manifests suddenly, like a shadow falling across the room. But the dark path demands more than mere observation and refusal. It demands deliberate psychological construction. One must cultivate an interior landscape where self-perception is independent, self-judgment is primary, and external evaluation is secondary. This is not vanity, it is armor. It is not arrogance, it is strategy. Every smile, every gesture, every word is filtered through the lens of maintaining composure. Emotional discipline becomes a language, and in that language, you speak volumes without uttering a sound. Others interpret this silence as confidence, authority, and most dangerously, as unpredictability. There is a subtle form of counter-manipulation inherent in this mastery. By refusing to be shamed, By not offering the anticipated response, you subtly educate the shamer and the observers. They begin to adjust their perception of you. They hesitate before attempting control. They may even defer power. This is psychological chess, where each refusal, each calm observation, each unreactive pause is a move toward dominance. Machiavelli would note that the most effective leaders often fight without striking, govern without issuing commands, and win battles before the enemy realizes they are engaged. But beware, the world is relentless. Temptation to react is constant. The voice inside screams to defend, to explain, to strike back. Others will provoke deliberately, seeking to shatter your discipline. It is in these moments, the darkest and most charged, that true mastery is revealed. Your reaction must be proportional not to the insult, but to the desired outcome. The only acceptable reactions are those that maintain your internal throne and further your strategic positioning. Everything else is feeding the shamer, validating their attempt, reinforcing the cycle of dominance you aim to disrupt. Ultimately, this is not about punishing others. It is about reclaiming yourself. To refuse shaming is to assert an internal sovereignty that cannot be negotiated. It is the cultivation of a psychological territory that no one can trespass. Machiavelli, observing the intricate dances of power in courts and cities, understood that such sovereignty is rare precisely because it is difficult. Humans are social animals, conditioned to adjust, comply, and yield. The unyielding are few, and in their rarity lies their power. Once you understand this, once you embody it, the world begins to bend subtly around you, not because you have struck anyone down, but because you cannot be struck. And so the question persists, sharper now, more insistent: will you allow the social knives of judgment and ridicule to find purchase in your mind and body, or will you cultivate an unshakable interior fortress, impervious to manipulation, invisible to the predatory calculus of those who seek to diminish you? Will you participate in the ritual of humiliation, or will you step outside it and watch as the instruments of control unravel in your calm, unflinching presence? The choice is not merely ethical, it is strategic, existential, and irreversible. Do you understand the exquisite cruelty of the human mind, the way it manufactures hierarchies from the invisible, assigning value, power, and meaning to each glance, each word, each pause? To dominate through shame is not mere an act of social aggression. It is a psychological operation, a precise calibration of perception and expectation. And the truly dangerous lesson, the one most refused to see, is that every person who seeks to shame is attempting to map your interior world, to redraw its borders, to insert themselves as surveyor, judge, and executioner all at once. Machiavelli recognized this centuries ago. The court, the city, the republic, all microcosms of human desire, were arenas where reputations, perception, and fear were the primary currencies. And in these arenas, shaming is weaponized, subtle, and relentless. Picture the landscape of human interaction as a chessboard, but one that shifts beneath your feet, where the pieces are alive, aware, and strategically aggressive. Every smirk, every raised eyebrow, every sarcastic observation is a calculated move designed to provoke compliance. Most people move predictably. They step back, apologize, explain, rationalize, self-flagellate, and thus reinforce the opponent's position. Machiavelli would say this is not misfortune, it is inevitability born of psychological conditioning. But the one who masters the dark way does not play the expected game. They step beyond it. They observe the pieces, the players, the spaces between, and they move where no one anticipates. The refusal to tolerate shame is a disciplined act, but it is also a deeply strategic one. Consider the anatomy of a shaming attack. There is the initiator, projecting superiority. There is the audience, absorbing and reacting to social cues. And there is the target, who stands at the center of the intended collapse. The effectiveness of the attack depends entirely on the participation of the target. Without engagement, the shaming misfires, revealing the aggressor as fragile, insecure, desperate. Yet few targets understand this. They construe the attack as truth, as judge me. NT as finality, and fold. Machiavelli's insight is that recognition of the mechanics of shame is power itself. The moment you see the trap, you can choose not to enter it. Now imagine the moment of refusal. The words land, a subtle laughter, a cutting remark, a veiled insult designed to provoke. Most would instinctively respond. Tension, shame, embarrassment, a flicker of self-doubt. the mastered individual reacts differently. Perhaps a neutral glance, perhaps a slight controlled exhalation, perhaps nothing at all. In that pause, there is a psychological shift. The attacker, expecting recoil, finds none. The audience senses something unusual. The anticipated hierarchy does not solidify. Anxiety ripples outward. Dominance begins to unravel. The power of the shamer is revealed as borrowed, contingent, dependent on the reactions of others. Machiavelli would note that the most dangerous people are not those who wield power with violence, but those who manipulate perception, control narrative, and leverage the psychology of fear and expectation. To never tolerate shaming is to reclaim the internal narrative entirely. It is to establish that your self-perception is not a communal resource but a personal fortress. Every attempt to diminish you is met not with confrontation, but with strategic non-participation. This is not weakness, it is lethal precision. There is a further dimension, observation as counter-strategy. By refusing to internalize shame, you position yourself as a mirror, reflecting the insecurities of the shamer and exposing the theater to all present. Every forced smirk, every calculated pause, every thinly veiled superiority becomes visible for what it is, performance, and humans are exquisitely sensitive to authenticity. Those who attempt to dominate through shame reveal their neediness, their fear, their fragile construction. The more one seeks to provoke a reaction, the more they expose themselves to being understood, measured, and anticipated. Machiavelli understood that the mind that observes without bias becomes a silent arbiter of power, capable of restructuring hierarchies without ever raising a hand. The mastery of the dark way also involves patience. It is not an instantaneous awakening, but a cultivated skill. One must endure countless micro-assaults, subtle tests, and repeated provocations. Each moment is an opportunity to practice composure, to maintain internal sovereignty, and to study the mechanisms of manipulation. Machiavelli observed rulers who endured court intrigues and betrayals without flinching. Their power was not in force of arms alone, but in the unshakable consistency of presence. The knowledge that one cannot be diminished quietly terrifies those who rely on diminution to feel elevated. Yet, mastery is not solely passive. Strategic intervention becomes possible once internal discipline is established. By refusing to be shamed, you also create space for selective psychological offensive. The shamer, exposed and destabilized, becomes predictable. Their patterns are no longer invisible. The targets of their manipulation can anticipate the attack, control the environment, and even subtly redirect social perception. Machiavelli would recognize this as preemptive dominance, winning battles before they are waged by controlling the terrain of expectation, the optics of social space, and the perception of others. Human behavior is inherently transactional. Shame is offered as currency, submission is demanded as payment. To refuse is to declare bankruptcy in the economy of social expectation, and the consequences are immediate. The shamer must recalibrate, the audience is forced to reassess, and the internal hierarchy subtly shifts. Some will resent, some will fear, some will respect, but all will acknowledge that the rules have changed. Machiavelli understood that to disrupt the established order without chaos is the hallmark of strategic genius. The silence of unflinching presence is louder than any accusation, more permanent than any retaliation. The psychological landscape is further complicated by proximity. Shame is most potent when delivered by those who know your vulnerabilities, who understand your fears, who have intimate knowledge of your self-perception. Family, friends, colleagues, even allies can exploit these vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Machiavelli's insight was that proximity magnifies opportunity for dominance. Therefore, mastery requires vigilance in all interactions, a continuous awareness of who can influence your internal world, and a deliberate strategy for maintaining sovereignty in close quarters. Now, envision the ripple effect of mastery over shame. Once you cease to participate, the social environment shifts. Others, observing your composure, unconsciously adjust their behavior. They test boundaries, reassess tactics, and often defer in anticipation of unpredictable response. You have become a psychological pivot around which perception rotates. This is power not earned by fear or force, but through unwavering discipline. The unyielding presence becomes a gravitational point in the social orbit, attracting influence and respect, while rendering petty dominance attempts impotent. But do not mistake this for ease. The dark path is exacting. It demands constant awareness, a relentless commitment to internal order, and the courage to endure social friction. Others will attempt to provoke, isolate, and discredit. They will craft narratives of arrogance, detachment, or coldness to justify their own discomfort. Machiavelli would call these defenses predictable, yet dangerous. Only through persistent discipline, strategic patti, and internal clarity can one maintain unassailable composure. And in this pursuit, there emerges a deeper truth. The mastery of shaming is mastery over oneself. To be untouchable is not merely to withstand the gaze of others, but to regulate the storm within. Fear, anger, humiliation, and desire are weapons wielded by the mind against itself if unexamined. Machiavelli's philosophy, dark and incisive, reveals that the most formidable power is internal sovereignty, the ability to navigate external assaults without internal collapse. It is the recognition that true authority begins with control over perception, reaction, and identity. This is why the refusal to tolerate shaming is both a defensive and offensive act. It shields you from manipulation while simultaneously asserting dominance through non-participation. It destabilizes those who seek to control you while creating a new axis of influence in your social environment. Those who once attempted to undermine you must recalibrate. They must confront the uncomfortable reality that their tactics are impotent against an unshakable mind. Machiavelli observed this in courts and republics. Rulers who maintained internal discipline could reshape external hierarchies without drawing a sword. So ask yourself, when the next subtle jab, the next carefully timed insult, the next social needle is directed at you, will you contract, apologize, or justify? Or will you stand like stone in the eye of the storm, calm, unmoved, calculating, and unassailable? Will you allow the social architecture to continue defining your worth? Or will you erect a fortress within from which you survey, control, and subtly recalibrate the entire field of interaction? The stakes are existential. The difference between mastery and submission is not merely social, it is psychological, emotional, and strategic. And as you consider this, feel the tension of possibility. The world will attempt, repeatedly, to measure, diminish, and manipulate you. Its methods are endless, its insistence relentless. But in the quiet, in the disciplined, in the unshakable refusal to bend, the seeds of true power are planted. Machiavelli's mind teaches us that dominance is not in the strikes delivered, but in the unyielding presence, the silent recalibration, the refusal to validate the weapons others wield. Here, in this dark and exacting space, the path to psychological sovereignty begins. Do you have the patience to endure it? Do you have the discipline to observe without reaction, to measure without interference, to act without surrendering? The dark way demands nothing less than the total reclamation of self, and in that reclamation, all attempts at shaming lose their bite, and power, once external and elusive, becomes entirely your own. Have you ever felt the sudden, almost imperceptible shift in the room when someone's attempt to dominate fails? A glance lands, a carefully crafted phrase hangs in the air, and instead of bending, instead of shrinking, you remain unmoved, your presence unmalleable, and the world seems to pause, sensing that something has changed. This is the power of refusing to tolerate shame. It is not an act of aggression, it is an act of revelation. Those who attempt to manipulate, to diminish, to assert superiority, are laid bare before themselves. They are forced to confront the inadequacy of their tactics, the fragility of their approach, and the emptiness of the authority they tried to claim over you. Machiavelli would note that the collapse of an opponent's strategy is not always visible, but its consequences are immediate, subtle, and irreversible. Shaming, at its core, is a transfer of power. The shamer seeks to extract compliance, obedience, or fear by exploiting your vulnerabilities, testing your self-perception, and forcing a reaction. The effectiveness of this transfer is entirely contingent upon your participation. If you accept it, you are complicit in your own diminishment. If you reject it, the entire mechanism collapses. This is the dark truth. Power exists relationally, not absolutely. No act of domination can succeed without the consent of the mind it targets. Machiavelli recognized this in the courts of Florence, in the treacherous corridors of power where kings, princes, and counselors observed every move, not with morality, but with calculation. Consider the psychological anatomy of shaming. It begins with perception. The shamer identifies a fissure in your confidence, a subtle insecurity, a trait that can be magnified for social leverage. Then comes articulation, the remark, the joke, the insinuation, designed to provoke acknowledgement, to elicit contraction. Finally, there is expectation, the anticipation of your compliance, the predicted flinch, apology, or justification. Every shamer operates under this formula, yet it is the last element, the target's reaction, that determines the outcome. A disciplined mind refuses to engage in the expected pattern. By denying participation, the target not only neutralizes the attack but also inverts power, making the shamer's move appear empty, desperate, and meaningless. But mastery of this refusal is not instinctual. It requires rigorous self-observation, the cultivation of internal stability, and the deliberate construction of an unassailable mental landscape. One must monitor thoughts, control impulses, and maintain awareness of the subtle physiological responses that betray compliance. The quickened heartbeat, the slight tension in the jaw, the fleeting flicker of doubt in the eyes. Each of these is a channel through which domination attempts seep into the mind. Machiavelli's philosophy teaches that awareness without action is insufficient. Action without strategy is dangerous. One must act with the precision of a surgeon, intercepting the psychological incision before it draws blood. The environment compounds the challenge. Most shame is not delivered in isolation. It is amplified by observers, peers, social networks, and cultural expectations. The eyes of others serve as instruments of measurement, evaluating both the shamer's skill and the target's compliance. Here, discipline is multiplied. To withstand public scrutiny without contraction is to assert dominance in a field of witnesses. The silent refusal becomes performative in its own right, demonstrating control not through words but through presence, posture, and the calculated absence of reaction. Observers unconsciously recalibrate, assessing status and hierarchy based on composure rather than rhetoric. There is a subtle psychology at play. The shamer relies on predictability. They expect a reaction calibrated to reinforce their superiority. The moment this expectation is violated, chaos enters the system. Confusion, doubt, and frustration emerge in the aggressor's mind. They may escalate, vary tactics, or withdraw. Observers, too, are unsettled. When one refuses to participate in the ritual of humiliation, they disrupt the social contract that defines acceptable behavior, forcing everyone in proximity to reconsider their assumptions about power, compliance, and vulnerability. Machiavelli observed that such disruption, when executed with consistency, is a tool of profound influence. This refusal is not merely defensive, it is strategically offensive. By maintaining unflinching composure, you expose the shamer's insecurities and amplify their dependence on superficial social authority. Their attempts to dominate, once effective, become hollow gestures. The audience sees the mismatch between action and effect. The shamer's position diminishes not because you attack them, but because their strategy is revealed as weak. Machiavelli's insight was that power is often most effectively asserted not through conquest, but through the demonstration of invulnerability. When one cannot be controlled, influence accrues silently, inexorably. Yet mastery demands patience, for provocations are relentless. Those who seek to shame will test boundaries repeatedly. They will vary. Tactics employ subtle manipulations and attempt to exploit emotional triggers. The path of refusal is therefore a continuous exercise in discipline, monitoring internal reactions, assessing external cues, and calibrating presence to neutralize threats without engagement. Machiavelli's dark philosophy emphasizes that this is a long game. The strongest rulers and strategists maintained authority not through impulse, but through consistent, deliberate practice of psychological command. Internal sovereignty, the foundation of this mastery, is cultivated through meticulous self-regulation. Every thought, reaction, and emotional fluctuation must be observed and managed. Fear, embarrassment, anger, and desire are the weapons shaming attempts to wield. By cultivating an internal landscape where these forces are acknowledged but not acted upon, one creates the conditions for true dominance. Machiavelli's rulers understood that control over perception, both one's own and that of others, was the most potent weapon. The ability to stand unmoved in the face of calculated provocation communicates authority more effectively than any act of aggression. The social ramifications are profound. When you refuse shaming, you recalibrate the social equilibrium. Those who relied on your compliance to feel powerful must adjust their tactics or accept diminished influence. Observers witness the shift, reassessing hierarchy and status. Influence begins to accrue silently. Invitations, deference, subtle recognition of competence and authority emerge not because of intimidation, but because others instinctively recognize the strength of unwavering composure. Machiavelli would note that such subtle recalibrations often have more lasting effect than visible conquest, for they reshape the architecture of social perception itself. Yet there is danger in this path. The refusal to tolerate shame, when misunderstood, can be misinterpreted as arrogance, coldness, or detachment. Allies may react with suspicion, rivals may seek new avenues of subversion. Machiavelli's strategy accounts for this. The disruption of expectation is inherently destabilizing. The goal is not to be universally loved, but to be strategically untouchable. Emotional responses of others are secondary to the maintenance of internal sovereignty. The disciplined mind accepts this discomfort as the price of strategic freedom. Consider the psychological geometry. Further, those who attempt to shame often do so in patterns. They will test limits, escalate, retreat, and vary approach, hoping to find cracks. By observing these patterns without reaction, one gains insight into the shamer's motivations, fears, and dependencies. Knowledge is leverage. Machiavelli would argue that understanding the mechanisms of attack allows one to anticipate moves, prepare countermeasures, and subtly redirect perception without overt confrontation. This is mastery, victory without engagement, authority without conflict. Ultimately, the refusal to tolerate shame is an act of psychological reclamation. It asserts that your internal domain is sovereign, your self-perception inviolable, and your reactions beyond the control of others. Machiavelli teaches that power is relational, and the most efficient way to accrue it is to make oneself untouchable in the eyes of those who seek to dominate. Each act of non-participation in the ritual of humiliation is a strategic move, a silent recalibration of social hierarchies, and an affirmation of internal authority. And so the question sharpens, echoing within every calculated pause, every silent gaze. When the next subtle attack is launched, will you allow yourself to be diminished, folded into the expected script, or will you stand immovable, reclaiming power in silence, demonstrating? The true authority resides not in conquest, but in the unwavering refusal to participate in the mechanisms of control. Will you continue to hand your sovereignty to those who wield shame as a weapon, or will you finally reclaim the throne within your own mind, where no one else can ever sit? Do you feel the weight of anticipation, the silent pulse of expectation that lingers in the air when someone readies themselves to diminish you? The mind is a battlefield, and shaming is the most insidious form of siege warfare. It is a campaign waged not with swords or cannon, but with perception, suggestion, and the relentless probing of weaknesses long buried, quietly catalogued, waiting for the right moment to be exploited. Machiavelli observed that those who could survive in courts, in republics, in the intricate web of human ambition, were not the strongest in body, but the most disciplined in mind. They understood that every glance, every carefully placed word, and every subtle insinuation was a maneuver intended to map the psyche and claim dominion over it. The dark art of refusing shame lies in understanding that it is never about you personally. The one who shames is speaking through their own hunger for validation, their own need to rise by pressing others down. Recognizing this is the first step in reclaiming power. Once you see the mechanism, you begin to dissolve its effect. Machiavelli's genius was in observing the world without moral distortion, seeing human behavior as pure strategy. To apply this insight is to step outside the emotional current that carries most people towards submission, to occupy a space where your internal state is independent of external assault. Now, consider the anatomy of mastery. To be untouchable in the face of shaming requires relentless self-monitoring. You must observe the surge of adrenaline, the tightening of muscles, the flicker irritation or hurt. Each physiological reaction is a potential foothold for domination. By naming it, understanding it, and refusing to let it dictate action, you reclaim territory that others presume they hold. Machiavelli would describe this as the cultivation of sovereignty over the self. The battlefield within must be secured before the external landscape can be influenced. Without internal command, all external maneuvers are futile, for the mind itself is the first territory to conquer. Shaming is also relational. It thrives on the presence of witnesses, on social pressure, on the unspoken assumption that compliance is expected. The strategic refusal, therefore, is not merely a defensive act, but a recalibration of perception in the minds of all present. When the expected contraction does not occur, observers sense a rupture in the hierarchy. Subtle social tremors ripple outward. Some will hesitate, some will reassess, some will silently recalibrate their understanding of who is in command. Machiavelli would note that influence grows not only through overt acts of power, but through these subtle disruptions of expectation, where dominance is claimed by presence alone. Yet mastery demands foresight. Those who attempt to shame are rarely predictable in their methods. They will escalate, vary tactics, and probe with persistence. Patience is therefore a weapon. By observing patterns, by cataloging tendencies, and by maintaining consistent non-participation, one achieves preemptive dominance. The shamer's moves lose their potency because their intended effect, the elicitation of contraction, is systematically denied. Machiavelli observed this principle in rulers who survived intrigues and conspiracies. Patience, discipline, and strategic inaction often produced more secure authority than aggression or retaliation. There is also a profound offensive potential in this. Refusal. By neutralizing attempts at humiliation, you expose the shamer to scrutiny. Their insecurity is revealed. Their reliance on borrowed power is laid bare. The social space shifts. They lose status, influence, and credibility, not through confrontation but through the demonstration of unshakable composure. Those who observe the interaction internalize the shift. Influence accrues silently, invisibly, yet decisively. Machiavelli would argue that to dominate perception is to dominate action itself, control the mind of others, and the material world bends accordingly. The challenge lies in endurance. To refuse shaming consistently is to withstand relentless social pressure, subtle tests, and repeated provocations. Allies may resent your independence. Rivals may escalate their tactics. Observers may misinterpret your composure as arrogance. Machiavelli understood that disruption of expectation is inherently destabilizing. Yet this destabilization is the price of sovereignty. Emotional reactions of others are secondary. The primary objective is the maintenance of internal authority. Each instance of discipline reinforces the fortress of self, making future incursions increasingly futile. This practice also cultivates clarity. By refusing emotional participation, you create space to observe strategy, motivation, and the patterns of behavior that most overlook. The shamer reveals themselves, often without realizing it, their reliance on manipulation, their dependence on your compliance, and the structure of their social calculation all become visible. Machiavelli prized this kind of intelligence. Understanding that insight into the mechanics of human behavior was more powerful than any physical weapon. Knowledge, carefully observed and strategically applied, converts potential vulnerability into command. Consider the long-term consequences. As you refuse shaming repeatedly, your presence transforms. Others begin to measure their words, hesitate before attempting control, and defer to your composure. Influence grows organically. Authority emerges without confrontation. Machiavelli's insight was that this kind of power is durable because it is not granted by force, but by recognition of internal sovereignty. It is a quiet, inexorable expansion of control over perception, thought, and social reality. Yet this path demands relentless self-discipline. The mind is a battlefield of its own. Fear, anger, desire for validation, and instinctive reaction all conspire to undermine sovereignty. Machiavelli's philosophy recognizes that mastery of others begins with mastery of the self. Emotional fortitude is strategic, composure is tactical, and patience is operational. Every instance of refusal, every unshaken stance, every moment of calm observation is a deliberate act of accumulation, building psychological reserves that are invisible to others, but undeniable in their effect. Finally, consider the ethical neutrality of this strategy. Machiavelli did not frame it as moral, he framed it as effective. The refusal to tolerate shaming is not about cruelty, vengeance, or public spectacle. It is about the strategic positioning of self, a reclaiming of territory that others presume to occupy, a reassertion of sovereignty in the arena of human perception. By refusing to contract, you do not merely survive, you dominate silently, inexorably, and with an elegance that exposes the weakness of those who sought to diminish you. And so, The question crystallizes with unbearable clarity. Will you continue to allow the instruments of humiliation to dictate your internal world, bending your thoughts, emotions, and presence to the expectations of others? Or will you step into the dark way, mastering yourself, neutralizing attempts at dominance, and reclaim the throne within your own mind, a throne that no mockery, no subtle attack, no whisper of judgment can ever dislodge? The choice is not theoretical. It is lived, moment by moment, breath by breath, glance by glance. The battlefield is always present. The victory belongs to those who refuse to participate in the diminishment of self. Do you feel it now? The weight of every gaze that has ever sought to diminish you, the echo of every word meant to make you small, the relentless pulse of expectation pressing against your mind and your body. This is the culmination of all you have endured, observed, and survived. The dark way is not revealed in a single act, nor in a sudden realization. It is forged in the relentless crucible of patience, discipline, and unflinching observation. Machiavelli would remind you that power is never given. It is seized, maintained, and silently asserted. The refusal to tolerate shame is not merely resistance. It is the creation of an internal empire, unassailable, sovereign, eternal. Every moment you have allowed the gaze of others to measure your worth, you have contracted, ceded authority, and reinforced patterns of dominance that are invisible yet absolute. Every apology whispered too quickly, every explanation given to justify existence, every flinch at ridicule is a brick in a structure built not by you, but by those who sought to control you. The dark way demands that these bricks be dismantled, that the architecture of external authority be replaced by the fortress of your own sovereignty. Machiavelli understood that the strongest rulers were not those who battled visibly, but those whose unassailable presence dictated terms without uttering a word. Now imagine the effect of absolute refusal. Every subtle attack lands on an immovable object. Every calculated insult fails to find purchase. Every attempt at humiliation collapses under the weight of composure. The shamer, the manipulator, the predator, they are exposed as weak, desperate, and ultimately powerless. The audience witnesses it, consciously or not. Social hierarchies recalibrate. The invisible chains that once bound you loosen, snap, and fall away. This is not vengeance. It is the revelation of truth. The one who refuses to shrink is the one who stands tallest, silently, infinitely strategically. But understand this, the path is exacting. You will face relentless tests. Friends, colleagues, strangers, even intimates will attempt to provoke, to diminish, to remind you of your place in the social order. Some will escalate, some will withdraw, some will fabricate narratives to explain their discomfort with your new power. Machiavelli would say, "This is predictable. The world always reacts defensively to disruption. Your task is not to justify yourself, not to retaliate, not to explain. Your task is to maintain the internal hierarchy, to govern the terrain of your own mind with unyielding precision. Every reaction is a move in the silent war of perception. Consider the mechanics of true authority. It is not declared, it is not sought. It emerges from consistency, presence, and sovereignty over self. The unshakable individual creates an orbit of influence that others cannot penetrate, a field of power defined by restraint, observation, and strategic non-participation. Every attempt to manipulate, control, or shame you is neutralized not by aggression, but by the invisible force of refusal. In this space, dominance is effortless, influence is magnetic, and respect is inevitable. Machiavelli would recognize this as the highest form of power: victory without combat, command without decree, sovereignty without compromise. And yet, mastery demands constant vigilance. The mind is a terrain of infinite subtlety, and the world will continue to probe, challenge, and attempt control. The one who refuses shaming must be an eternal observer, a disciplined architect of internal response, a strategist who wields patience as a weapon and composure as armor. The dark way is not for the impulsive, the emotional, or the easily swayed. It is for those willing to inhabit the tension, to cultivate clarity amidst chaos, and to persist in the relentless reclamation of self. Now, envision the final consequence. The internal fortress, unbreachable, generates external shifts. Those who once sought to diminish you hesitate, recalibrate, and defer. Influence grows, quietly, without spectacle, without confrontation. Authority becomes inevitable, because it is recognized, not demanded. Machiavelli's wisdom was clear. The perception of power, once unassailable, structures the world in its image. By refusing shaming, you restructure social reality, not through force, but through the demonstration of untouchable sovereignty. And here lies the ultimate truth. The dark path is not cruelty. It is not vindictive. It is strategy. It is precision. It is the deliberate and relentless refusal to participate in the diminishment of self, the meticulous cultivation of internal authority, and the quiet, unstoppable assertion of dominance through composure and discipline. Every insult neutralized, every provocation denied, every gaze unyielded to, is a declaration that you are the sovereign of your own mind, and no external force can claim dominion over it. So hear this, with the weight it deserves. The next time the world attempts to make you small, to expose a weakness, to provoke fear or compliance, will you contract and surrender, or will you rise silently, unmoved, calculating, and untouchable? Will you let others carve your self-perception, or will you claim it as your own, irrevocable, absolute, and permanent? The choice is not theoretical, it is existential, it is strategic, it is the defining moment between those who are ruled by the world and those who rule themselves. Take this moment, this clarity, and let it ignite an irreversible transformation. Stand immovable, observe, calculate, and reclaim. Let every attempt at shaming collapse into impotence. Build your internal empire, fortified, sovereign, and untouchable. Become the master of perception, the architect of influence, the unassailable presence that shifts hierarchies, commands attention, and exerts authority without a word. The world will test you. It will try, endlessly, to break you. And yet, once you have embraced the dark way, once you have refused to tolerate shaming in every form, you will be untouchable. You will be sovereign. You will be powerful beyond the comprehension of those who once sought to diminish you. Now, rise, stand, command. Let the silent fortress of your mind become the instrument of your dominion. Let no mockery, no subtle jab, no whisper of derision ever touch you again. The dark way is yours to embody. The throne within your mind awaits. Claim it fully, without hesitation, without apology, without fear. The world can try, but it will fail. You are untouchable. You are sovereign. You are power incarnate. Rise into it now, and let nothing ever diminish you again.